Welcome back to KeZaka Stokvel Insights. We are continuing our deep dive into Ahanang Mathaka's journey, exploring what's next for them and how they can elevate their success. Still with me in studio to provide expert insights is Thabiso Masurubele. Thabiso, before the break, we were looking at issues of legacy, issues of continuity, especially with Ahanang. They have a concern of whether this will go on and prolong. So how would you advise them in order to bring in that membership, especially young blood?
There's a term that I'd like to use. It's that term called generational mix. A lot of the time we hear that term used in politics, but it applies to groups as well. And what that term simply means is that you've got a generation, the current generation of Ahanang Mathaka. In many groups, you have the founder and people who started the group many years ago. But one of the challenges they face is that they've not successfully infused younger generations or generations that follow into their group, making sure that their group will continue. But this comes down again to what their purpose is and what their vision is for the group. So groups like Ahanang have clearly identified the need to continue beyond themselves, beyond the founding members of the group, because of the benefit that the group has given to its members. So in such instances, we encourage groups to either through their constitution or through the marketing that they do, but to begin introducing, even if it's their children, their sons, their daughters, people who are of the next generation into the group so that it becomes a seamless handover process. So once you get the next generation participating in meetings, you have this infusion of the old and the new so that there's no one that's more important than the other. Because remember, I think a lot of the time people from the older generation tend to think that the new generation wants to kick them out. However, there's value in what and how the old generation used to operate things. The infusion then becomes when the new guys begin to say, you guys used to do this the same way. It'll have the same outcome. However, there's an easier way to do it. Things like, making deposits, things where technology has advanced. So it's about infusing it. And once the older generation gets it from a younger generation that they're familiar with, that transference of processes and administration becomes easier. So it's not something that's rushed. It happens over a period of time where you've got maybe the son of the chairperson being a member and the son of the other people being members. They then know what the culture of the Stokvel is, and then they get to continue the culture, because the culture must be the one thing that remains consistent with the growth of the group. But when it comes to issues of administration and so on, so for instance, the older generation will believe in books and writing the minutes and notes and so on. The newer generation would bring laptops and iPads and so on, just to make sure that the minutes are captured in a more efficient way using technology, but you still have the same effect of having those minutes. So we always encourage groups to look at how they can begin appealing to younger generations to be part of their groups.
Now, let's just look at the revenue model for a second. How would you suggest that Ahanang diversify their investment strategy here? Because I can just imagine that if you work on this will make it easier for you to increase your membership because they will, have faith.
Yeah. So with a lot of burial societies, in our experience, there are a lot who engage with underwriters and who have their books in order. But with a lot of them, what we've seen is that they rely on savings to pay for benefits. So you have a burial society that's got a savings account, and because they've been contributing over 5 years or 10 years, they're sitting with a balance in their savings account of 200,000 Rand, 300,000 Rand. And for them, that's the money that they use to pay the benefits. So if someone passes away, there's a claim, they go into their savings account and everything looks proper. But there's a risk, a huge risk, but there's also a huge opportunity with groups that we engage who are like that. The risk is that you might find a situation where you get more claims than you anticipated, and the money that you have in your savings account is no longer enough to honor all the claims that you have. That then leads to conflict and all sorts of problems for the group. We've seen many groups collapse because of that. The opportunity then comes in answering the question that you raise. So once a group like that then moves from using their savings account to to pay benefits, they can then move to an underwriter and start paying premiums to an underwriter, which is a registered official entity where even if you have 100 claims, those claims should be honored provided you're paying your premiums. What that then does is that it frees up the money that they'd have in their savings account. You'll recall that one of the members of Ahanang Mathaka was saying we want to get to a point where we aren't paying out of our pockets for our premiums. So it's to look at how much do they have in their savings account, moving those monthly premiums to an underwriter. Once that happens, they're then able to take that lump sum that they'd have in their savings account and pay the premiums to the underwriter, meaning they're no longer paying from their pocket. Or they can then take that lump sum and invest it, either long-term or short-term, and generate an income from that. That would then enable them to pay whatever their premium bill is at the end of the month.
What about the option of possibly turning into accredited sports academy as well? How will that work for them?
That's actually one of the great things about this group, because one of the things that they have going for them is the legacy that they've built. I mean, it started from this camaraderie that they had playing soccer. And clearly they've got a passion for, community development using sport. So given their experience, given their age, given their passion, they're well positioned to start something like an academy. What they then have to do is go back to their admin and say, how are they registered? A lot of groups, their registration is only via constitution, and they normally just have a constitution so that they can open up a bank account. So what is it that they need to do? Do they need to start looking at, is this thing going to be an NGO where they're giving back to the community, or is it going to be something that's a revenue generator for them, getting sponsors, getting funding from government, from corporates and that sort of thing? So once they've gone through that process of identifying how they want to do this thing as an NGO, an NPO, or a business, that then would lead them into deciding on what type of registration they'd need to do. But with all of that comes strong administration. And I think that's where we've been engaging, particularly with Ahanang Mathaka, to say once they finalize their decision making, we're then going to help them and say, this is the process to follow in registering an NPO. This is the paperwork that you need. Once we have that paperwork, then they can start operating and sourcing all sorts of grant funding and then we help them also build a profile as to why are the people who are well positioned to be able to run these academies. And that involves, sourcing venues. I mean, if you're going to do a soccer academy, you've got to look at venues. Now, one of the challenges, for instance, in the township is you used to have these playing fields, recreational grounds, but they weren't grass, they were old. Those aren't there anymore because developers have come and they've built malls and they've built. So one of the challenges that there aren't nearly as enough soccer fields that you need. So it's a process of identifying space where they can then have these soccer fields, and that costs money. How do they then engage, with the Provincial Department of Sports, Arts and Culture? How do they engage with the National Department? There's also an opportunity to engage with school sports, where they then go into schools and say, this is what we'd like to do, and explore if there are partnerships in that area in order to see how they can run the academy.
There's so much for us to still explore on the show. We've had such a variety of Stokvel groups, so it's so interesting to see the investment opportunities that can come out of them. That's all we have for now. If you are a part of a Stokvel like Ahanang Mathaka and need more insights on today's discussion or any other topic you'd like us to explore, don't hesitate to reach out using our contact details on the screen. Until next week, goodbye.
This program is brought to you by Thai Vision Media, helping Stokvels and burial societies reach their goals.